only ship to either recyclers who are certified to R2 or recipient vendors that can assure that all equipment and components shall be resold in conformance with Section C1, the R2 ready for reuse, or the R2 ready for resale. So you need to be able to do your due diligence to make sure that you understand what they're doing it and how they're going to ensure that the equipment that you're sending them will be able to be reused or resold. And then 3, recipient vendors that can manage all equipment and components containing FMs and residual FMs resulting from repair and refurbishing operations in conformance with provision 3 and 5. So basically, anybody who you're sending equipment to for repair, there may be components that are not working. There may be components that are just not able to be repaired. You need to ensure that they have the capability and that they are managing the material properly as far as sending it downstream for either demanufacturing or destruction or whatever it might be. So that's basically going down to your end of life. So you need to make sure that you're doing the due diligence on that because technically they would be a downstream vendor. And then finally, ensure that the equipment or components meet the specifications of the recipient vendor. So D in R2 2013 electronics recycler need not conform to Section C for sales of collectible electronics and their assorted components or specialty electronics. That the R2 2013 electronics recycler does not possess the technical capability to test or repair. Such sales are restricted to 1% of total individual units by quantity sold on a rolling 12-month average. So if you have an old item, collectible item, specialty electronics that most people don't have the capability of testing, repairing it anymore, you're going to send it to somebody who's a collector, possibly. Those type of things don't go in line with Section C. They don't need to go through the quality assurance plan and go through all of that necessarily if it's under the collectible electronics or specialty electronics. And there's specific definitions of those in the new version of the standard to clarify that. An R2 2013 electronics recycler shall conform to the legal requirements, including export and provision 3 for these sales shipments. Obviously, you still need to make sure that you're meeting the legal requirements regardless of what you're shipping. You may not be held under the requirements of testing all of the components because you're not capable of it. That's fine, but you still need to make sure that you're meeting the legal requirements. Number 2, an R2 2013 electronics recycler need not conform to the downstream requirements of provision 5 for these sales shipments. So as far as due diligence goes, if you're sending collectible electronics, specialty electronics, and it's within the 1% of your quantity sold over 12 months, you do not need to do the due diligence for these items. And then E, excuse me, an R2 2013 electronics recycler need not conform to the downstream requirements of provision 5 and the exporting requirements of provision 3 for shipments that are basically ready for reuse or ready for resale or are new and in original packaging. If you've tested everything, everything's working properly, it's ready for reuse, or if the key functions are tested and working properly and you meet the requirements of the resale, provision 5 does not apply because the due diligence shouldn't be required because they're using it for reuse or resale. You're not sending it to downstream vendors for further processing. Now, as far as new and in original packaging, be sure that if you're receiving items that were sent back, let's say you're working for a OEM or you're working for retail, you're receiving material from a retail customer and they receive products that were not functioning but they're still in their original package, obviously those do not apply in this requirement. Those still have to go through the testing and the requirements of provision 5 and provision 3. Provision 7, tracking throughput. So an R2 2013 electronics recycler shall maintain for at least 3 years commercial contracts, bills of lading, or other commercially accepted documentation for all transfers of equipment, components, and materials. So an R2 2013 electronics recycler does not need to track non-FMs beyond the first tier downstream vendor. So let's say plastics, you need to track that to your first tier, but not beyond that. So for your non-focused materials, do not need to be tracked beyond the first tier. And this is a new requirement in the 2013 version. B, an R2 2013 electronics recycler shall provide to each customer upon request and with appropriate intellectual property controls as required by the disclosure, the names and locations of all downstream vendors in the recycling chain. So if your customer requests the names and locations of all downstream vendors, you are obligated to provide that information to them. Now, we've had some issues in the past with customers not wanting to provide that information upstream. Obviously, if you're not willing to provide that information upstream, you can't have them as a customer. If they're going to be your customer, you are legally, not legally, but as far as R2 standard goes, you're required to provide that information to your customer. Provision 8, data destruction. Most of the requirements here are the same. The R2 recycler still needs to follow, at a minimum, the NIST requirements. They have to have a documented procedure for data destruction. Employees involved in data destruction shall receive appropriate training on a regular basis. This is also follow over from the 2008, but what's new is that they need to be evaluated for competency in the data destruction processes. So it's not just training somebody and letting them go. It's you train them, and once you train them, you need to evaluate that they understand the training, that they understand their requirements for that procedure. So that evaluation of competency, those records need to be maintained. The process reviewed and validated by an independent party on a periodic basis. This is also a carryover from the 2008. Quality controls shall be documented, implemented, and monitored internally to ensure effectiveness of data sanitization, purging, and destruction techniques. This is new. So you have to have quality control in place. This is, again, where the ISO 9001 or the Reus helps, because you already have those quality elements built into those standards. But you need to have your quality controls, they need to be documented, and then you need to implement them and have, obviously, evidence that you've implemented them and that you're monitoring them. Security controls shall be documented, implemented, and maintained that are appropriate to the most sensitive classification of media accepted at the facility. Security controls shall consider physical security, monitoring, chain of custody, and personnel qualifications. So for those handling your sensitive data containing devices, you need to make sure that you have the security controls in place, that the personnel who are handling this material is qualified. And then G, adequate records of data destruction shall be maintained by the recycler and each downstream vendor for data destruction. So if you're sending the data containing devices downstream for processing for data destruction, you need to make sure that you're receiving the records of that data destruction. So just sending it down there and forgetting about it is not acceptable. You have to make sure that they're sending you back confirmation or records that, whether it's a certificate data destruction, wherever it might be, that material is getting destroyed properly. So H, if your data destruction is being handled by a downstream vendor, there's certain requirements that you have to adhere to. 1, 2013 electronic recycler shall maintain responsibility for data destruction and ensure appropriate security controls and processing techniques continue to conform to provision 8. So basically, it's your responsibility. Once you receive it, tell it the data is destroyed. It's your responsibility. Number 2, media or devices containing media with data must be tracked and secured during transportation, storage, and processing. This was not specifically stated in the 2008 version. It was kind of hinted at in the guidance. But this is now saying that any data containing devices must be tracked and secured during transportation. So you have to have some way to track it, some way to ensure that it's secured, and in some way to make sure that it's stored and processed properly. And then number 3, each downstream vendor must adhere to the requirements of Provision 8. So it's your responsibility to verify and to confirm that the downstream vendors are adhering to this provision. Provision number 9 for storage. Again, there's not really too many changes to this provision. You still have to protect them from atmospheric conditions, floods. Equipment that's being stored needs to be in legal compliance. Access needs to be controlled and secured. And then container labeling and storage areas identified. So pay attention to any legal requirements, such as CRTs and batteries, and consider inclusion in ongoing monitoring activities to ensure any compliance issues and container integrity to eliminate leakage. So there's really not too many changes to this one. And for facility security, there's not a whole lot of changes in this one either. Consider equipment, sensitivity of media containing data and customer needs, and consider and include necessary controls to secure electronic equipment upon acceptance of said equipment. So that second one's really the main change to the facility security requirement or provision. Again, that's consider and include necessary controls. So from the time that you accept that equipment, that material needs to be secured, especially for data containing devices. Provision 11, insurance, closure plan, and financial responsibilities. There's a few more requirements in this one as well. In R2, 2013 electronics recycler shall be able to demonstrate that it has evaluated the risks arising from its certification activities, and that it has adequate insurance reserves or to cover liabilities, including environmental pollution and worker health and safety. We received word from R2 that if you can justify not having environmental pollution, that is acceptable, but you need a confirmation from your insurance carrier that you are not required to have the environmental pollution based on your operations. So an auditor will want to see that confirmation from the insurance carrier, and also they'll want to see what you gave to the insurance carrier to show that you are exempt from the environmental pollution. So I know that's a key change from the previous requirements. B, develop and maintain a current written plan and financial instrument that assures proper closure of the facility and assures against abandonment of any electronic equipment and components and materials from such equipment. There was a lot of confusion around what was required, especially when the guidance came out from the 2008. So we want to clarify some of that confusion. So 1, financial instruments must be assigned to an independent party or a corporate parent. So an independent party doesn't necessarily mean somebody that works for the company. They have to be independent of that facility, and but they can be the corporate parent. So if your headquartered is somewhere else, they can take responsibility for the financial instruments in closing your facility, but it cannot be somebody at that particular facility. 2, the financial instruments shall consider the risks identified in Section A and applicable laws, including reasonable foreseeable costs of processing remaining inventory, sampling for environmental contamination, and site remediation to restore premise to sellable conditions. So it's expected, depending on what you're handling and what you're processing, that part of that financial instrument is going to cover processing the rest of your inventory. And if there's any potential for environmental contamination or site remediation, that those checks have been done and that you have the financial instrument in place to address those issues. And then your closure plan, it needs to consider the risks identified in A and also include details assigning who's going to close the facility, the funding information, who's responsible, and it has access to that funding, and then also what the plans are for processing the remaining inventory, for conducting the environmental sampling, and for conducting any site remediation or overseeing remediation. Provision 12, transport. This is B. I didn't include A, but B is as part of the new requirements. Electronic recyclers must verify that as transporters, so including its own fleet, so any trucks, vehicles that you have, any of the drivers that you have all the necessary regulatory authorizations. You maintain adequate insurance coverage consistent with the material and method of transportation, and maintain an acceptable vehicle and driver safety record during the previous 3 years. So if you are having your own drivers drive your trucks, you need to make sure that your vehicles meet the legal requirements, that your drivers have a safe driving record. So you have to do this also for any outside company that you use for transportation as well. And then lastly, provision 13, documentation and record keeping. An R2 2013 electronics recycler shall have access at the certified facility. So at the facility that's being audited, you need to make sure that you have all the documents and records necessary to show that you are conforming to all the requirements of the standard. So you shouldn't have all of your documents or keep your records at your headquarters for your facility. Everything should be accessible at your facility in order for an auditor to come in and ensure that you are conforming to the requirements. All right, so that basically covers the standard and some of the changes. We're running a little short in time, so I want to get through this last part as quickly as possible so I can answer any questions that we may have. So R2 certification. So if you are in the process of getting certified to R2 2008, we have a number of companies who are already registered to get certified to the 2008 version. You have to be certified by the end of the year, by December 31st, 2013. Otherwise, if it's past that date, you'll have to go to the 2013 version. So, like I said, any company wanting to get certified, if it's after that initial 6 months, starting January 1st, 2014, will have to get certified to the new version, 2013 version. And then any company certified to 2008, whether you're currently certified or you're in the process of getting certified to the 2008 version by the end of the year, you have to be upgraded to the 2013 version within 18 months from the release of the standard. Not from the time that you got certified, but from the release of the standard. So even if you get certified to 2008 on December 30th, 2013, you will have to upgrade to the new version by December 31st, 2014. So certified company licensing agreement. So as part of the new requirement for R2, you have to maintain the licensing agreement with R2 Solutions, and that has taken effect, even if for those who are certified to 2008, that has taken effect starting the release of the 2013 version. So starting July 1st, 2013, you should have a licensing agreement with R2 Solutions, whether you are 2008 or 2013 within the next 18 months. That is one of the new requirements, and that's part of in the R2 Code of Practices. So if you engage in electronics reuse and recycling activities, such as refurbishing, collecting, reselling, processing, demanufacturing, recovery assets, brokering of electronic equipment or components, remain current in its payment to R2 Solutions for the licensing fee, and abide by all requirements related to the use of the R2 logo. If you have questions, look at the R2 Code of Practices, contact R2 Solutions, or you can contact myself. I'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation. So issuance of certification and notice to R2 Solutions. So as part of our audit, we will ensure that you have a valid licensing agreement with R2 Solutions. If you're a multi-site certification, we need to make sure that you have clearly identified where your headquarters is, what's the controlling site. For campus certifications, you still need to have a main processing location. You need to identify what the main processing location is, and then follow the R2 Code of Practices. Basically, campus says you can have multiple facilities within a metropolitan area, is what the R2 Code of Practices says. So if you have questions, again, I know I'm going over this pretty quickly, but look at the R2 Code of Practices or contact me, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have. And then if any allowances are used, each allowance will be documented on the certificate. Again, like I was saying, if you're a broker, you're a collector, whatever allowance you're going for, that'll be stated on your certificate. Issuance of multi-site sampling certificates. So if you want to go for a multi-site certification, you'll have one certification basically for all of your locations, but you need to make sure that you have one EHS management system in place, all the shared processes and procedures throughout the multiple locations. The idea is you're getting a discount and a reduction of audit time because you have one system in place over multiple facilities. All sites listed on a multi-site certification must be visited and fully audited as part of the initial certification. New sites must be fully audited before being added to the multi-site certification. So for R2, during the initial audits, every site needs to be audited. After that initial certification audit, then we can break off into basically a multi-site sampling where we'll audit certain facilities each year, with the headquarters always being audited. So each remote site must be visited at least once every 3 years. So if you're having a multi-site, you may only have 2 sites audited during your surveillances. But if the sampling from the IAF document doesn't cover all of your sites, we'll have to add those in because every site needs to be audited within those 3 years. So here's the certification process for those of you who are new to the process or are looking to get certified. Initially we have the stage 1 and stage 2. So once you've established your system, you've implemented your system, you feel it's running effectively and you're ready to get certified, we'll first have a stage 1, which is basically a documentation review. So we'll need to come on site, look at your documents, and do a quick overview of your facility to make sure you meet the documentation requirements. And then we'll come on site for the stage 2, which is we'll verify the implementation of those documents. So generally, we try to schedule about 30 days after the stage 1, generally up to 75 days if need be. That way, if there's any issues identified in the stage 1, you'll have some time to address those issues. Now, the R2 Code of Practices states that if you have so many nonconformances that are raised during the stage 1, you'd need at least 6 weeks before the stage 2 to give you enough time to properly change the procedures and implement those procedures. But again, we'll work with you on that and help you understand that once that time comes. And so that's more or less what the stage 1 and stage 2 is all about. And then once you complete your stage 2, any nonconformities that were identified are resolved and addressed, then we can issue your certificate. So following the stage 2, you have annual surveillance audits. If you choose to, you can have them every 6 months, but generally they're every 12 months. And this is just a partial system audit. We're looking at key areas of concern from the previous audits, potential areas of concern, more recent concerns, and then some key parts of the standard that we always audit. And then every 3rd year you have your recertification audit, which is a full system audit, and then this cycle just basically continues. So at this time, I'll open it up to any questions that you may have. So first question for those with R2 2008 certification, wanting to become R2 2013, what additional audit time is required that will impact the cost? For upgrading, there are a few things. If you look at the R2 Code of Practices, depending on how many nonconformists you had previously, depending on how many downstream vendors you have, that all goes into the audit times for R2 now. So it's not just before it was kind of based on employee count and risk level. With R2 now, there's really no risk level. It's more if you have 5 downstream vendors versus 1 downstream vendor, because obviously the more downstream vendors, the longer it'll take to audit. Similarly, if you had 10 nonconformists on the previous audit or 1 nonconformance, we need to verify closure of those nonconformances during the audit, so it'll require more time. So the R2 has required certain additional requirements as far as time goes. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. It's hard to say what that actual cost will be until you call us and we can verify some of that information and provide a quote for you. Does PGR give auditors the new R2 and copy of the slides from your presentation? The new R2 standard is available on R2 Solutions. You can go on there and download it along with the R2 Code of Practices. But in our presentation will be available after the presentation. And if you want it sooner than when it's posted on our website, contact me and I'll email you a copy of it. Next, will PGR provide any type of F108 or other checklist for R2 2008 surveillance audits that incorporates any changes from R2 solutions? Excuse me. We have made a decision that we will no longer be using the F108. That'll be effective towards the end of the month. So the F108 will no longer be required. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the F108 was our request for initial kind of a pre-assessment almost. It's not a pre-assessment. We just want to make sure that some of those key documents are in place. So we just do a quick cursory review of those documents to make sure that you have the foundation in place more or less. But we've decided to get away from that. If a client has questions or concerns, they can obviously contact us. We can't provide, consulting, but we can help guide them in the right direction. Next question, R2 2013 requires all the certification of ISO 14001, OSAS 18001, RIOS, or either one of them. R2 2013 requires one of two options. Either you are certified to ISO 14001 and OSAS 18001 together with R2, or you get certified to RIOS alone with R2. The idea being that RIOS already incorporates ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and OSAS 18001. It incorporates a good portion of those requirements. So that's why it's an either or. It's either 14 and 18 or just RIOS with R2. And that goes into effect either when you are initially certified or on your upgrade. So if you have not been certified to ISO 14001 or 18001, and that's what you're looking to incorporate with your R2, on your upgrade audit, we will have to, we'll probably have a stage 1 first, and then we'll do the stage 2 at the same time as the upgrade audit for R2. Next question, 18001 necessary. If you go the RIOS route, then no, it's not necessary. But otherwise, 18001 and 14001 is mandatory for an R2 certification. Otherwise, it's RIOS with R2 for certification. Approved standards means recycler documented and implementation and maintaining without CB registration or must be approved for said certs. Oh, I see what you mean. So the requirement in the standard talks about you have to be 14001 and 18001 or RIOS. Or if another standard comes along, you'd have to get that approved. You could come to us and we could go to R2 Solutions and request that. I've heard questions about possibly companies wanting R2 and eStewards, where eStewards already incorporates some of pretty much all of the 14001. So could they replace 14 with eStewards and 18? There could be some other standards that come out that could replace, incorporates 14 or 18 that could replace the need for having specifically 14 or 18. But for anything other than having 14, 18 or RIOS, we would have to get that approved through R2 Solutions. But there are potentially options out there that you could take. But again, we would contact us and we can discuss that on a kind of a case-by-case basis. There's another question, perhaps internal audit team, audit term newly introduced now. I'm not sure I understand that question. If you could provide some clarification on that. Question here, we are AS9100 Rev C certified by PGR. In order to have R2, do we still need the OSA and RIOS? If you're AS9100, you will still need certain elements. You'll still need 14 and 18. But to be honest with you, I'm not as familiar with AS9100 Rev C, so I don't want to speak incorrectly. I can definitely look that up for you. If you want to send me an email, I can get with our aerospace department and verify what you would need. Next question, R2 2013 now covered with internal audit of recycler system. You are required to verify that basically your system is effective, and in some ways it incorporates you must audit in certain parts of it. But obviously for 14, 18 Rios, those automatically require auditing. The idea is that for those specific provisions that require auditing, those definitely need to be checked. As far as the rest of them, I'd have to look into that, because there's really, maybe the guidance will come out with something, but there's nothing in there that specifically says that. But that's a good question that I will look into. Okay. Earlier it was compliance audit only instead of internal audit. For the compliance portion, yes, you have to conduct a compliance audit, which is very different from an internal audit. Internal audit, you're looking to make sure the process is effective, making sure that that you do meet the requirements, but it's more sampling. Where a compliance audit is you're looking at all your legal requirements to make sure that you are in compliance with all those legal requirements, and to make sure that all the legal requirements still apply and that you've identified them all. So here's a statement, AS is only a 9001 replacement. That was my understanding, but I didn't want to speak without being completely familiar with it. So AS wouldn't really replace anything because 14 and 18 are completely separate from the 9001. If you went the Rios route, yes, the AS would potentially take care of your 9001 requirements, but Rios still, within the standard, requires 9001. So AS might not help you avoid any of the new requirements as far as having 14, 18, or Rios. But obviously being certified to a standard already can help reduce some of the audit costs. R2 2013 now covered with internal audit of, yeah, it was already done. Which is cheaper to certify, R2 2013 or R2 Rios? Well, it's really not R2 2013 or R2 Rios. It's R2 2013 and 14, 18, or Rios. Obviously, there's different costs associated with getting certified to 14 and 18 versus getting certified to Rios alone. 14, 18, there are two standards. There are two certificates. There's different sets of requirements, where Rios is one standard. However, there's also a fee associated with getting certified to Rios, and that's through being a Rios member through ISRI. What the exact, which one's cheaper, I honestly couldn't say right now. It's probably personal preference, but if you're interested in finding the difference, again, contact us. We can prepare a quote what the difference would be if you were to get certified for 14 and 18 versus just getting certified for Rios. But without knowing your facility and what sort of processes you do, it's hard for me to specifically say which one would be cheaper. This presentation will be available on our website shortly. Within the next week, it'll be available. If you would like it sooner, you also put my contact information up. Here it is. You can contact myself, send me an email, call me. I'll get your contact information, and I will send you a copy of it. There's a question for a checklist of internal audit. I'm not sure if you're looking for a checklist to conduct an internal audit. As a registrar, we're not allowed to provide any of that type of information. I know I haven't actually received word whether or not R2 will be coming out with a new checklist for the 2013 version, similar to what they had for the 2008. If they do, that may be a helpful tool for an internal audit. But at this point, I'm not aware if they will be having one or not. Next question is there a provision for resale of components on a circuit cord that will be removed and sold for resale? Testing of each component is possible. When you get into circuit boards, it becomes a little tougher. It's really up to the organization to determine how they're going to test that. It's hard for me to say what a company can and cannot do because I'm not allowed to say that, but you'll have to come up with your testing methods and determine whether or not that's adequate for testing that material. And I think that's all the questions. If there's... Oh. Here's the question. Don't you still need to meet R2 2013 even if you are RIO certified? Yes. They are two completely different standards. So if you want to be R2 2013 certified, you have to meet all the requirements of R2 2013 and, in addition, the requirements of whatever route you choose to go, whether you choose to go to get certified to 14 and 18 or if you choose to get certified to RIOS. But you still need to meet the requirements of each standard that you are going to get certified to, and you will have an audit to each standard. You may have an integrated audit if you have one system between all the standards, but you will need to get audited to each system that you have. Here's a question. Normally, what sort of clauses can be claimed as part of allowances? There's really not that many that can be claimed as an allowance. The main, more common ones, like I said, would probably be the data destruction if you don't deal with any data-containing devices. The other one will most likely be reuse if you receive components that are not able to go for reuse. If you're just receiving shredded components or whatever it might be, and there's no way it can go for reuse, obviously that clause does not apply to you. But you need to ensure that you're not going to potentially receive any material that can go for reuse or resale. Those are the two main ones. Again, if you had other ones to consider, you'd have to run it by us on a case-by-case basis, and we'd have to evaluate it and make sure that you truly can claim that as an allowance. Just look and see if there's any other presentation or any other questions real quick. So here's a question. For the transportation, if you don't have any trucks in this part, did I need to collect the record from my courier? Yes. If whether it's your trucks or you're using an outside company, a courier, you have to make sure that you maintain and you do your due diligence on those transportation companies to ensure that they meet the requirements of the standard. Quality plan is needed for all the processes in the organization or just only for data security and sanitization. The quality plan is basically required in the data security. It's required in the reuse section, whether you're to ensure that whatever you're testing is effective, that you're meeting the requirements of the standard, that you have the quality check to make sure that your test methods are accurate and they're working properly. All right. The next question, if SAFER only provides 2 years for our new clients, how are they getting 3 years from a transportation provider? What if a broker is used? How does a client ensure 3 years? And does a letter suffice? if obviously for a new client, you want to get at least those 2 years. And then if you can get basically documentation from the transportation company showing how they qualify their transportation companies and check their transportation companies, and whether you get a letter or whether you get the procedures from them, confirmation that they meet the requirements. There's a number of ways you can do it, but you want to do your best to get that 3 years. I know for initial clients it can be a bit challenging. So if the downstream vendor is responsible for organizing the transportation, do the recyclers still need to be responsible for 12B? If the transportation company, if you don't ship anything, not a single thing, and all your downstream vendors are responsible for coming to your facility to pick them up, then no, it does not apply to you, because if that, once the downstream vendor takes responsibility of that equipment, it's under their control and it's their responsibility. But it's very difficult. I haven't seen too many companies that don't do any shipping at all. So be careful of that one. But yeah, it is potentially possible. Let's see what else we have here. All right. Well, I apologize if I didn't get to your question, or if you had questions that I wasn't able to answer. If you have specific questions, feel free to email me. I know we're well past our time, and I don't want to keep everybody. So if you do have specific questions, please email me, whether it's regarding quoting or the technical questions. I'll either answer them myself or direct you to the appropriate person. So I'd just like to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. Again, we will be holding another one once the guidance comes out to discuss some of the requirements of the guidance or clarifications of the guidance. But again, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. I look forward to you on future webinars. Thanks.